Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's CA Security Community Webcast. My name is Kristen Palazzolo, your CA Community Manager. And today we're talking about the latest release of CA Single Sign-On 12.6. And today you'll be hearing from Herb Melhorn, Product Manager. He will be presenting on what's new in this latest release. We will have Q&A available, so if you have a question for Herb during his presentation, feel free to ask in the chat window or the Q&A panel, and we will get to those questions as soon as we can. We will be recording today's webcast, so if you need to jump off early or if you know anyone who missed it and you want to forward it on to them, feel free to send them the recording. We'll be also posting the recording link as well as Herb's slides to the CA Security community later today. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on over to Herb. Thanks, Herb, for doing this today. We're excited to learn more about this release.
Hey, well, thank you very much, and thank you to the folks who have joined the call so far. I see the numbers of people who are attending, and they're gradually increasing. So I think we will find that the first part of this will be a sort of a little bit of a reminder associated with the capabilities of the product, and hopefully as more people come into the call here, they'll be breaking in at just the right time as well. So as sort of a quick summary of what it is that we want to go through here during the course of the next 60 minutes, it's really this. We're going to talk a little bit about the product, the value of the product, and the particular value of this release. And we'll talk in more detail then about what components are included in the release, covering some of the features and the business needs that are addressed by these new capabilities. There are some other pieces of important news that I want to share as well, and so I bundled some of those pieces into this presentation. Then finally, we are going to take just a sneak peek into the future and talk about some of the capabilities that we are working on that are being exposed on validate.ca.com, and then any Q&A that we haven't touched on we'll try to cover. At various points I'll stop as we transition from one segment to another segment and take a quick look at the chat function to see if there are questions that are there and see what we can do to answer those real time. And if it looks like we're going to run short of time, I will hold questions sort of till the end. So I'll be trying to monitor the time as we go and make sure we cover as much of the terrain as we can. So a little bit of just a refresh of what is CA Single Sign-On, what its purpose in life is. I think most people here on the phone have used it for a period of time. I know I was just at CA World. We asked a number of people in the audience how many people have been using the product for, I think, more than 5 or 6 years, and perhaps some people more than 10 years. But we also had some people that were newer into the use of the product, some people as recent as within the last year. And so for them, I did want to just have this simple refresh at the front end of the slide deck where I talk about what's new in 12.6, but I did want to touch base on, you know, the intent behind the product, what its capabilities are. And, you know, the most basic assumption is that you execute a single logon, you have access to multiple applications. Those applications may be in your data center, they may be at a partner site, they may be in the cloud. But the fundamental value proposition is a single layer of access management, single sign-on control that you can apply to application terrain that you need to control access to and to give usability and productivity to your constituents so that they can execute a single logon and get to the information that they need. But if those of you who have been using the product for a while recognize that the value proposition is much more than just a single logon providing access to the resources you need. Various forms of authentication are relevant and important to determining when and how to grant access to different applications or resources. Support for federation in its various forms is a key component of the product and helps extend the support for multiple applications and different environments in both on-premise and off-premise usage. The concept of centralizing your administration and giving the ability to scope and delegate aspects of that administration to different parts of your team, policy-based authorization for determining what sort of conditions will need to be satisfied before access is granted, and scalability in doing those sorts of things to customers who have larger and larger customer bases as well as applications that are protected. Right now, I think my largest customer, if I think about scale, we have organizations that transact as many as 3 billion plus transactions per month going through their single sign-on infrastructure. We have organizations that have thousands of applications whose access to those applications is controlled through CASSO. So that policy-based authorization and doing so at scale has been sort of a fundamental value proposition associated with the product for a long period of time. Certainly, sort of that base single sign-on functionality, and then the ability to generate information about authentications and authorizations that the product delivers. So these are additional, elements of value that are delivered in the context of the whole solution. And the other thing that is true is that connection to applications takes a variety of tools in order to do that successfully across a broad terrain of applications that you run. So we have out-of-the-box agents that can work in the process space of web servers. We have an access gateway, previously called the secure proxy server, which allows you to enforce access control using a proxy-based model. Although the access gateway itself does a variety of additional things, there are RESTful interfaces and SOAP-based interfaces for enabling SSO to act as an authentication or authorization service in your infrastructure. Support for open standards, again, such as SAML and OAuth, and also an open format cookie, which is a lighter weight form of accomplishing single sign-on primarily to those environments that are don't require quite as much security protection as you might use agents for. So there are a set of tools that are part of the overall single sign-on solution, and I know that when I talk to a number of customers, they typically are very familiar with agents. They're certainly familiar with some of the SAML support. They're not as familiar with some of the other forms of application integration, and certainly as we've progressed with the development of the product, we find more and more customers making use of all of these tools. So we encourage you to continue to sort of learn the capabilities of the solution and make use of them to the greatest extent you can. The product value in aggregate, is really about addressing these business problems, right? Controlling access to information resources, reducing the cost of managing access, and enabling end-user productivity. The combination of those things have been essential to the product going back over a long period of time, and they continue to be that way. There is an external sort of peer-reviewed website called IT Central Station, and the most recent screenshot you see here comes from October of 2016, so just roughly 6 or 7 weeks ago, where we gathered this set of information from that site, and we encourage you to take a look at that. I would assume that most everybody here in the audience or who will listen to the replay associated with this webinar are customers of ours, and I think this helps reinforce the fact that as peers look at the various solutions in the marketplace, that CASSO is a leading solution, and as reviewed by peers is scored as such. And so you can take a look at this and see the other vendors that are noted there, and take a look at the detail that's been part of the assessments that have taken place. But we wanted to share that with you. If we talk about how we increase product value, so you're using the product, what are the things that we can do within SSO, and how do these relate to some of the things that we are doing in the 12.6 release? Well, you know, one of the ways we increase value is by adding the ability to support more applications and more application access use cases, looking at ways to simplify the solution so that the overall total cost of ownership improves. And finally, because in fact we know that part of what we do is deliver the characteristic of security, one of the things that we want to do is continue to look for ways to improve the solution's overall security posture. So those are the sort of three key elements of what we're trying to achieve. And in the 12.6 release, you'll see aspects and elements of all three of these that were delivered as part of that release. So I'll stop here just for a second to take a look at the chat function, see if there are any questions that are there. I don't note anything in the chat function at this point, which is fine. I'm assuming that we'll see more comments as we go forward. But if there is anything that I missed, Kirsten, let me know, but I don't think so.
Nope, I don't see anything.
Good. So the second part of this webinar really is to focus a little bit on some detail around the information related to the release. So in this release, 12.6 release, we basically implemented and delivered new instances of the SSO admin UI and the SSO policy server, and finally we also added a new release of the gateway. So a couple of quick comments on this slide, and you'll see this replicated in information ahead. The version number associated with the admin UI and the policy server is 12.6.01. And the access gateway is 12.6. The reason for that is we released an early access version of 12.6 on the admin UI and the policy server in September, and we made a modification to the performance of administration in relationship to federated configurations that are in the policy store. And when we made that modification, we essentially built a service pack, 12.6.01, and released that at the same time we released the access gateway. And that release took place at the very end of last week. So the most recent version, if you will, of the admin UI is 12.6.01, and the policy server is the same, and the access gateway is 12.6. We did not release any new versions of web agents, but again, many of you know that with the newer version of the policy server, we always support backward compatibility with older versions of the agents or previously numbered versions of agents, and that is true here as well. So new functionality that we're going to review going ahead in the next set of slides relate to the admin UI, the policy server, and the access gateway. So let's talk about them. In the area of federation, we made a number of changes. A number of these changes are built and driven to enable additional scale and manageability around federated partnerships and to simplify configuration of federated partnerships. So the first area that we spent time and energy on is around certificate management. You'll see in the 12.6 administrative interface that in a number of different places within the administrative UI, you will be able to see certificate expiration details associated with the certificates that are being used. In addition, we started to build in the capability to support parallel or secondary certificates and keys. We did this in the signing, the signature side of the certificate pairs. And so fundamentally what this means is you can have a SSO implementation that will have multiple certificates and keys associated with applying digital signatures and validating digital signatures, such that if a signature, if a sample assertion arrives with a signature on it, the server will know to process and attempt to validate that signature with the primary or the first certificate alias, and then if not successful, it will go to the second certificate alias. And the value in doing this is it helps organizations manage certificate expiration in a way that is easier for them. The coordination with your federated partners is simpler, both from a timing and a certificate rollover perspective, because you will have the ability to have multiple certificates and keys in the solution at the same time. You can, if a certificate is going to expire a week from now, create a conversation with your partner and ensure that the certificate that's going to be used starting, in essence, 2 weeks from now can be loaded into the system and be available so that there is a seamless change in use of certificate and keys when that period expires. So this is, again, focused primarily on helping organizations as they grow out the volume and numbers of partnerships that they have, and enabling greater scalability around certificate management. And then one of the other key pieces of this capability is enabling the ability to update certificates and certificate information without deactivating the partnership. So again, the intent there is seamless availability of an application that is made available to your users through a federated partnership. Other things that have been added in this area related to federated partnerships and configurations. One of the things that was added relates to inserting the assertion consumer service URL in the authentication request, so that, in essence, you can, if with SSO acting as a service provider, respond to an identity provider with a set of information that in essence directs the identity provider where you'll be able to consume a authentication. And you know, this sort of simple write-up, if you will, is just meant to describe the nature of how this can be done now in a way within the context of an authentication request that's sent by the service provider to the identity provider. Another area relates to support for dynamic authentication. In this case, with SSO acting as an identity provider, the service provider will indicate to the identity provider the level of authentication that's needed, and if the identity provider has a valid user, the identity provider can, from the same federated configuration, without having to create multiple configurations for the same partner, but through the same configuration for that single partner, can have multiple authentication levels supported and provide and achieve the level of authentication that's necessary for the service provider. And really the simplicity or the thing that's added here is an element of simplicity for configuration on the identity provider side with, in essence, having a single federated partnership with a configuration that can support multiple authentication contexts and strengths. And then finally, in the area of federated enhancements, we've improved the usability with this attribute consuming service index. Essentially what this does is it provides the ability for the service provider to indicate to the identity provider the types of attributes that are needed in order for a user to get access to the application they need. And that also has sort of a side benefit in the sense that it would enable an identity provider to package up only the attributes that are necessary for that service provider, such that the volume of attributes that might be shared by the IDP could be reduced if the service provider only needs a minimal set of attributes, and the identity provider then has less worry about how much information it's sharing about the users it authenticates to the service provider. So there are two benefits there. Again, one is trying to ensure the service provider has the attributes they need, and the second is trying to ensure that the volume of attributes that the identity provider shares is as minimal as possible. Okay. Other areas of enhancements that are part of 12.6 as well as 12.6.01 are in the area of management. So one of the things that CA has as a capability is a tool called Remote Engineer. And Remote Engineer is built around being able to collect additional information about an environment where CASSO is running, and then package it up and provide a secure FTP connection back to CA support so that CA support can have an aggregate set of data for doing troubleshooting and accelerating troubleshooting. This was first introduced in 12.52 SP2, but that was a Windows-only policy server release, and this is a release that covers the Red Hat platform as well, and will be the first sort of the first exposure to Remote Engineer for a number of organizations that either didn't run 12 SP2 or were running on Red Hat. There is also a set of improvements around tracing and log rotation that are part of the 12.6, and again, the key value related to this is the improved ability to capture critical data for troubleshooting. In some instances, and for some use cases, the improvements here are will also enable the capture of log information if a policy server were to crash. So there are some inherently important supportability capabilities that had been rolled into the 12.6 release around tracing and logging. And then finally, one of the other areas related to management that had been one of the highest voted items on our community site is the ability to search for agent configuration objects within the administration interface of CASSO. I don't make significant mention of this at the end of the presentation, so I'll just stop here and touch base on that, which is there are a lot of enhancement ideas that are rolled into the community site. We do take a look at those on a regular basis, and as indicated here, and as we've indicated within the community site, there are some others that that will be delivered in the future. But this was one of the highest voted items at the time we were generating the plans for 12.6, and we rolled this into the release. So we hope a number of the organizations who voted for that will find it useful. We ran through a period of validation with customers around this, and we hope you find it as useful as it was intended to be. Just a little bit of additional detail on CA Remote Engineer. One of the things that it does is it runs on the system where the policy server runs. It'll help collect information, log information off the policy server, but it will also grab an additional set of information about the environment in which the policy server is running. And there was a webinar that was done specifically to the community around CA Remote Engineer itself, and if people who are on this or listening to this had never seen that or aren't aware of it, please let your account manager know, and we'll make sure that you can get a deeper dive on Remote Engineer. But it certainly has the ability to provide significant enhancement in supportability of the product and ability to get diagnostic action taken by the support team here very quickly. So we encourage you to learn a little bit more about that. It is bundled as part of 12.6, and it will be part of releases going forward in the future. Another area that's really important, I think, to touch on here is related to platform enhancements, and so we'll sort of slow this slide down a little bit and talk you through bits and pieces of this. On the SSO admin UI side, one of the things that we did with the 12.6 release was increment forward the application to become a 64-bit application, and that has side benefits around performance. It also allows us to continue the development and release of the product on newer versions of environments or libraries that are require the 64-bit capability. We've introduced our first support for Red Hat 7 on the administrative interface with this release. We added the Java 1.8 support for Red Hat 7, which was also 64-bit. On the policy server side, same thing. We implemented the policy server as a 64-bit application. You'll see in the slide ahead some data about the improved performance that we saw in our lab. The other thing that occurred when we developed the policy server is we changed the installation and configuration of the code and the software associated with a feature called Enhanced Session Assurance with Device DNA. And that results in a simpler installation and configuration overall of the policy server from its first implementation of session assurance in the 12.5.2 version. So with 12.6, you'll see a simpler, slimmer, easier process for doing installation of the server, and that really relates specifically to how we re-architected aspects of this feature. One other piece that had been rolled into the 12.6 release, which is likely where many of you will first see this capability, is improving the communication process with the session store. More and more of what we build and deliver and what customers need us to provide support for typically requires some context maintenance of a user's session, and the session store becomes more important. It's a prerequisite for the enhanced session assurance functionality. It's a place where if you're using, say, our advanced authentication solution and you want to maintain a risk factor assessment, it would be maintained in the session store. If you're using SAML assertion and you want to take attributes from an incoming SAML assertion and maintain them, you can do that and maintain them in the session store. So more and more of the use cases that we see are ones that require the use of the session store. Many of you know CA Directory is a free of charge piece of software that you can use with CASSO for its capabilities when used as a policy store or a session store. And we expect and anticipate and continue to believe that more and more organizations are going to need to make use of the session store going forward for a number of different use cases that we supply. Also on the policy server, we introduced a native repair tool almost, and a tool that allows you to interrogate the integrity of your policy store and tee up modify, and make changes to that policy store in order to maintain integrity of data in that policy store. Again, first introduced in 1252 SP2, but now being offered with 12.6 across a broader platform support, and it is something that can be used to interrogate older policy stores and determine whether those older policy stores have any policy objects that need repair or need modification. And then there are elements of improved system diagnostics that are available within SSO. There's some better ability to get stats from the product based on these changes. And then again, finally, the inclusion of the first delivery of the policy server on Red Hat and the ability to run that with a Java 1.8 implementation. So those are the pieces in the session store, in the policy server that also partially relate to the session store. And when we look at the Access Gateway, some very similar kinds of things. The Access Gateway now is a 64-bit application. There are some improvements in performance related to that migration to a 64-bit application. There are some changes inside of the Access Gateway. We have a sort of enclosed STS, and we made some modifications in the Access Gateway so that we could better support Safari browsers when being used in conjunction with an Office 365 implementation. And then in the area of enhancing just the overall security posture of the solution, the Enhanced Session Assurance with Device DNA feature that was introduced in 12.5.2 gets extended further with the ability to provide support for post-preservation flows. There is also an ability to offload an SSL termination to a load balancer. So we've made some additional modifications with the 12.6 version of the Access Gateway that further improve your ability to protect user sessions. And then, again, the first implementation of Red Hat 7 and Java 1.8 support as well there. When we talked a little bit about the performance improvements, we wanted to share you some information, some data. These are data that are out of our labs. Your implementation will vary. The responsiveness of your user repository, the size of payloads and SAML assertions. There are a variety of things that will vary from these numbers. But when you take a look at them, but one of the things that we feel very confident about is that you will see performance improvements if you're running on Windows or Red Hat, if you're using Federation, and if you're on Red Hat 6, which appears to be the place where the greatest performance improvement was achieved. You could see performance improvements on the order of 100% in sort of standard single sign-on, HTTP get and post kinds of transactions, and roughly a 25% perhaps improvement in the area of Federation performance as well. So again, your mileage is definitely going to vary. It's not going to be the same, but undoubtedly you will see a significant amount of performance improvement, certainly significant enough to notice and to help you also with scaling your use of the product and its capabilities, as well as achieving more with the existing environment that you have. So there was a question that was raised in the chat function I'm just going to touch on here for a second. The question was, does the partnership need to be disabled to add the secondary certificate at a later stage? The answer, I'm pretty sure to that question is no. You can add a certificate at a later stage. You don't have to have the secondary certificate at the first implementation of a federated partnership. You can add a secondary certificate at a later stage, and you can do so without disabling the partnership. So now I'm going to touch base on just a couple of important considerations. These aren't meant to be exhaustive. One of the things that I really encourage everybody to do is, go to the release notes, take a look at information that's described there about what's been added to the product, and in some cases, some things that we are not supporting going forward, and there are some other details that will certainly be covered in the release notes. I know that's sort of one of the areas of the tech info which probably doesn't get as much attention as it should, but it's really going to be important to be able to look at that. But there are a couple of things that I did want to specifically point out. One is that custom code that you may have when you go to 12.6, you're going to a 64-bit implementation. So you may have custom code that you've developed. You may have custom code that a system integrator developed. You may have custom code that CA's professional services team has developed. And you're going to have to basically take that code and move it to a 64-bit executable. And that is something that I think organizations will have to think about and roll into their plans. Obviously, with the increment of Java, you may have to do something there as well. So an important consideration when you're thinking about the use of the product. Features that are not yet available. One of the things when we built 12.6 was we went to the RSA organization and said, hey, guys there, do you have an SDK that will allow us to build support for secure ID authentication into our Red Hat 7 policy server? At the time they didn't. They do now, but they didn't then. So in the short term, perhaps Radius might be an option, but if you go to Radius, you're going to have to use the base Radius capability and then perhaps the global delivery XOF Radius add-on. And because we know RSA now has that support for Red Hat 7, we will be adding that to the product at the earliest possible point that we can, but we wanted you to be aware of that. One of the other things that I know is that we have a set of customers who have and make use of CA application performance M. I'm not sure. The M might be monitor or manager. I'm not sure which. But the CA application performance manager, and their intent, that team in the CA organization's intent is to test and certify the 12.6 version with the 13.0 version of their CA APM for CA SSO. So a couple of things to be aware of. And one last piece that I think is pretty important as well to be aware of is I know a number of organizations make use of the global delivery package work products, so things like the advanced certificate authentication component, the XOF Radius component that I referred to before. There is a published roadmap for those things. It is the link is here in the slide deck, and I know the global delivery team has been building and completing their availability of these package work products for the 12.6 release. You can go to that website location and get the latest set of information about that. So if you are making use of some of those components, be advised to take a look at that as you start thinking about the use of 12.6 in your environment. Okay. That's the content that I really wanted to touch on in relationship to the 12.6 release. Again, any comments or any questions that are there in the audience, feel free to add them to the chat function. I will certainly take a look at that and respond to them as they come in. We did want to provide additional information which is important. Some of this information is around the 12.6 release. Some of it relates to things that are slightly adjacent to it, but wanted to share these things. So one of the pieces that is key is around how customers execute upgrades. And I wanted to indicate, and many of you know this, the CA services team has the ability to provide some support for upgrades, and those offerings range from sort of upgrade support where you're doing most of the work all the way to manage projects where the CA services team does a large majority of the work. So, and you can sort of pick and choose which set of capabilities and services you might want to leverage from the CA services team. Additionally, there's one other thing that I want to make sure people are aware of. I don't yet know if this has been fully released yet, but I will take a look at it because I know it was imminent. We were just trying to sync it up with the release of the tech info on 12.6. Is the CA support team has built and exposed a sort of a step-by-step detailed workflow that you can walk through to see how you execute an upgrade. You know, there's obviously an upgrade guide within the product documentation, CA Office Services. We have a number of partners that help people. In addition, there is an on website, so to speak, step-by-step instruction. And if that is not yet public, as soon as it gets to be something that we put into the public realm, we'll make sure there's a community announcement about that, so there'll be a link to that upgrade information. I did not look this morning to see whether it was there or not, but it will be there shortly if it isn't there already today. Let's continue. Other pieces of information that are relevant. There is a new advanced core administration class for the CASSO. And this was, I don't know, back in 2015 at CA World. There was a session that was done as part of the pre-conference training. And the response to that was very strong. And we decided to take that and morph it into an actual education class that could be provided, but it was clear that the sort of the nature and detail and depth of some of the material that would be discussed really was better suited for an instructor-led training session rather than a web-based training session. So the availability of this course, which just occurred in the last couple of days, is now available, basically gets into some additional detailed technical configurations around policy server internal sizing, monitoring, et cetera. There's an additional set of information at the link noted at the bottom, and there are potentially some additional electives that are going to be added to this course that aren't yet available, but I expect that some of those electives will show up somewhere in the roughly next 3 months. So I'm starting to see some additional questions that are showing up here. I'm going to stop and see if I can take a couple of them. I'm looking at the clock as we go here as well to make sure we cover a variety of things. One of the questions asked, are you going to address reporting in this webinar? I hadn't intended to address reporting specifically, but I'll just make a couple of very tied-out comments related to that. CASSO had incorporated a CA reporting engine in earlier versions of the product, and the original provider of that reporting engine and CA ended up deciding to change courses and go in different directions. At the time that happened on the CA product, we took a closer look at the use of that reporting engine within CASSO itself, and we made the decision that what we wanted to do was enable customers to make use of the reporting engine of their choice, And so we chose not to continue to bundle a reporting engine for net new customers who started with the product after, I think, April 1st of 2016. Now, a number of these bits and pieces had been provided through announcements on the website, but what is true is if you were a customer of CASSO using the reporting engine prior to March 31st, 2016, you can continue to use that until we fully decide to end of service that. Even with 12.6, you have the ability to use the reporting engine with the 12.6 version of SSO that we just released. So that's a quick summary of that. If you need more information or more detail, two things I would suggest. One is, again, sort of take a look at some of the information that's been published on the website, and or ask your account representative to connect with us in a different forum, and we can go into more detail there. There's another question that says, can we get a list of all the features that require the session store? Yes, happy to do that. I'm not exactly sure in what form. Maybe we'll put it out as a knowledge-based article. Maybe we'll wrap it into the product docs. Actually, now that we've got the product docs on a wiki, we can spend them more quickly. So yeah, I'll take that as an action item, and we'll provide that information that way. Let me keep progressing, and we'll come back to questions here before we wrap up and try to get through as many of them as we can. Another piece of information that I think is important and potentially valuable to a number of organizations. Within CA, we have a number of parts in the security portfolio. One of them is known as Privileged Access Manager. And with the Privileged Access Manager 2.7.1 release, which was recent, I don't know off the top of my head exactly when it happened, but I think it's somewhere within the last 3 to 4 months. The Privileged Access Manager essentially took CASSO agent and embedded it such that it can act as an agent, and you can protect access to resources within CA PAM through CASSO. What you see on the slide is a very sort of simple screen capture of the configuration that's executed on the PAM application, and for all intents and purposes, CASSO just looks at that application as if it's another agent implementation. One other piece, some of you may have been able to get to CA World, some of you may not. Some of you may have seen some of the announcements around CA World. One of the things that we know is critical to organizations as they move forward is support for hybrid-based deployment models and hybrid-based processing between on-premise applications, cloud-based applications. So at CA World, CA announced the availability of a new service called CA Identity Service. And there are a set of use cases that primarily fall into the federation space, where integration between CASSO on-premise and CA Identity Service are interesting and potentially valuable to organizations who are looking at a hybrid kind of model. Now, this is completely optional. There's no requirement related to organizations who want to integrate with SaaS-based applications to use CA Identity Service. So fundamentally, think of this as in the scheme of the options and the opportunities and the palette that's available to you for meeting the needs of your users, an option for a deployment model that may have value and use to you. And one of the main sort of outputs of the integration is this additional piece of capability called the Unified Launchpad. And what the Unified Launchpad is about is trying to make it easier for end users in your organization, Primarily, this is employees, sort of a B2E implementation, but employees within the organization that have the need to gain access to applications, and perhaps they bring their own device, perhaps they have multiple different devices they use, some laptops, maybe some tablets, mobile devices of different forms and shapes, and the Unified Launchpad concept is how we make it visible to end users the application environments that they have access to. So a lot of us, are relatively advanced when it comes to the use of technology. Sometimes end users in our organization aren't as advanced, and given the fact that there are changes that are being made to applications that they have access to and how they have access to them, there is value in a Launchpad. Think of it as the end user portal that enables the ability for end users to very simply and easily gain access to applications they need to, with a set of security policies that are wrapped around how that happens. So that's really what the Launchpad represents. It's, again, an optional implementation, and fundamentally what that would look like with CASSO and the identity service is the ability to have applications that the users have access to, whether they are protected and accessed via CASSO or via CA identity service, to be represented within this single unified Launchpad. And the Launchpad can be dynamically configured such that the users see what they have access to. And obviously, this ends up being extensible as users are granted access to additional applications. The Launchpad reflects that. So think of this as a tool for simplifying the use and access of applications that are either provided through CASSO or through CI Identity Service or through both of them, and represented to the end user in a easy-to-use fashion. Last piece that I'll just comment on related to what's cooking as we go forward. So we've touched a little bit on what the product does, its base core values and capabilities, some of the capabilities in the 12.6 release, and some other sort of adjacent information that's relevant, some of the additional integrations that have been developed and brought to market within PAM, within the CA Identity Service. But on CASSO itself as a core component going forward, here's some information about what's being developed. And for those of you who are not yet aware, we are focusing our engagement around the work in progress, code development, design development, use case development through validate.ca.com. If you have credentials that allow you to log on to CA support site, those same credentials allow you to log on to validate.ca.com. And when you do, you can select the CASSO program. And what you'll see in there is development of these areas and some more things. This is not to state that these are going to be in our next release. The way Agile development works, is the approach that we follow now with CASSO, is we start the development of work without having an exact determination of when it will be finished, and as a result of working with customers and validating the output of the work, we release it when it is done based on that interaction with customers and based on the sufficiency of the feature set. So areas that are ones that we are most focused on right now relate to exposing the ability to manage, create, update, delete objects through a REST interface, exposing and enabling the use of a federation token type known as OpenID Connect. Additionally, enhancing support for web-based clients or clients in general that have the need to speak over the HTTP protocol but don't necessarily understand things like 302 redirects. So we will provide the ability to respond with JSON objects, XML objects that allow web applications or applications to better be protected and brought in under the umbrella of CASSO. And then finally, around the area of authentication, one of the key items that's been voted on in the community is IWA fallback to forms authentication. And so what we've done is we've developed a more generic approach to enabling the chaining of authentication methods, and the first implementation of that base design is IWA fallback to forms. And so you can see the development of these items and a few more that aren't necessarily mentioned here in, on the website at validate.ca.com. And finally, I did want to just bring your attention to, in addition to some peer review things, we continue to have dialogues with marketing organizations. They do assessments of technology. This is just a quick snapshot to, again, sort of indicate that you're in good company with CASSO, and there are some market research data that's available on ca.com related to this assessment. And at this point, I'll stop and see if there are any other key questions that are in the chat that I should try to look at. Is there anything else, Kristen, that you can see?
I've been trying to pull over some things from the Q&A panel. I don't know if you were able to look there.
All attendees. Yeah, so I have, I don't have anything more that I can see, but I don't know if there are more items. I think primarily the, I'm not sure if there are any others that are key, but here's what we'll do. I'm assuming that all of the chat content is available. I will take a look at it, and for anything that wasn't addressed by myself or perhaps some other folks who I know were on the chat trying to respond to things, we will connect and create a response associated with the question. And Kristen, is there a way in which the chat responses are bundled up with the slides that people can refer to?
Yeah, I'll send those over to you and get those out to everyone as well. Yeah, so we'll make sure those get out. I have a poll running for everyone. If you can take that poll and just give us some feedback on what you thought of today's webcast. And like I said earlier, I will send out the replay, the video replay from today's webcast, as well as her slides. It looks like there's some other questions coming in, so we have a couple more minutes. Jim asked, are there any new features pertaining to integration with Azure or Office 365?
The only feature that was in 12.6 related to the Office 365 support, I hope you saw, was the Safari browser support that comes with Access Gateway 12.6. In terms of support for Azure and Office 365, there's the last sort of outstanding feature area that we addressed was IWA-based authentication through thick clients, not browsers, but through thick clients to achieve single sign-on to Office 365. That was done last December, and if you go out to the Microsoft website that sort of lists third-party providers that can provide single sign-on to Office 365, CASSO is listed there with no exceptions and with sort of support for all of the use cases that they qualify vendors around. So the only real change in implementation was just that Safari browser support item that I mentioned with the Access Gateway.
Okay, great. All right, I don't see any other additional questions at this time, so I'll make sure you get the feed of all the questions, Herb.
Perfect.
I want to thank you for doing this today, and thank you everyone for joining. We'll see you at the next community webcast, and I hope everyone has a happy holiday season and a happy new year. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, everybody.